Hello everyone, this is Raj. Hope you are doing great today. Today for this video, we're going to be talking about how to form better habits. So, an overview of this lecture. We're going to first talk about what habits are, just an overview of what are habits and why they are important. And then we're going to talk about a bunch of different tips for habit formation, with the biggest, most important one being changing your environment. And then at the end of this lecture, we're going to have sort of a summary, an example of how to apply these tips to improve your habits. So, this lecture is based on the research that is contained in this book that is on the screen right here, The Science of Positive Changes, Good Habits, Bad Habits. This is written by a psychologist who studies how our mind works, Wendy Wood. And so this is just going back to my, I guess, commitment to making this course as research, as based in the research for studying and habits as much as possible. So first, I want to talk about why are we learning about habits? Because this is a class on studying, so why do we have to learn about habits? This is because over the next few weeks, you're going to learn about a lot of different strategies to improve your performance in college. And for each of these strategies, it's going to take both forming new habits as well as breaking old habits. And as I'm sure your personal experience, my personal experience definitely shows, as well as a lot of research, it is very difficult, sometimes at least, to form new habits and to break old habits. Just because we're very used to the habits that we have been doing for years and years, right? And another thing is that, like I've said before, I wish that we were taught how to study, how to better listen and better focus earlier on in school. Unfortunately, in many places in the world, we're not really taught these sorts of tips and strategies. And so, what can happen is that over time, when we go to primary and secondary school, we can form habits that are not based in what research says is the most effective. Um, and so, we can form habits that are not as effective as we would like them to be. And it can be challenging then to break these habits and form new ones, which is why we have this video today. So, to start, first, I want to ask you all this question. Pause and think of your response. What's more effective for having good focus in class? Is it either having your phone on your desk and using your energy, your willpower to not look at it, or to just leave your phone turned off or at home? So I'll give you a second to think about your response. So it turns out that the second option, leaving your phone turned off or at home, is way more effective and way easier. Why is that? It is because of the difference between habits and willpower. So, willpower is when you are making a conscious decision to do something. Using willpower is when you're making a decision to do something or to not do something, right? And it is involving mental effort, right? For me to not look at my phone in class, if my phone is right next to me, it's going to take me some energy, some effort to deliberately not look at that phone. Habits, on the other hand, are kind of the opposite. They are automatic and they are effortless, right? I don't have to think about looking at my phone, um, and it doesn't take any effort. In this case, the option of leaving my phone at home or turned off would be a habit that I would form. And in this case, if I form the habit of just turning off my phone when I'm in class, it is automatic. I don't even think about doing it, and there's no effort. And because there's no effort, it is going to be much more sustainable, much easier to engage in this behavior over time. And so this is why habits are really important, is because they are ways to have better behaviors that have much less effort and are much more automatic. So, what are habits? Habits are performed when we perceive familiar cues in our environment that make us respond with the habit. So, for instance, an example is that when I'm in an environment where the teacher is talking, maybe they're doing some sort of lecture, this is a cue for me to listen to the teacher, since this is a habit that I've formed ever since primary or secondary school. And like I've said, habits are behaviors that we always are doing consistently without really thinking about them, which is why they are very effortless because they require no mental effort or very little mental effort. So, why are habits important? Like I've said, making decisions from willpower is not sustainable. It is very difficult, and you will likely end up making some short-term progress, but will eventually go back to your old habits that are not as effective. Another reason that we want to make habits instead of relying on willpower is when we rely on willpower, we can also make unjustified excuses for not following through on our goals, right? So sometimes, right, for instance, I can say that I don't have to, go to bed early today because I'm just very tired, or I deserve to stay up. And sometimes there are justified reasons for these sorts of excuses, but a lot of times there are not justified. And so research shows that people who succeed at their long-term goals do so from just forming good habits that take, weeks, months, sometimes even years to really get good at. And psychologists have found that we underestimate the power that habits have in influencing our daily behavior and decisions, which is another reason why it is very important to learn how to form better habits. So, now we will talk about how we can improve our habit formation. The first and most important strategy is to change your environment. What does that mean? So, an example is there have been a lot of studies that found that when you want to get people to quit smoking cigarettes, making it more difficult to smoke by forcing people to smoke outside of public areas changed people's habits. Why is that? Because instead of relying on willpower, people that used to smoke now all of a sudden could not smoke because they are in areas that are where smoking is banned, right? So this is an example of an environmental change where the environment is now saying that you can no longer smoke cigarettes, making it to where people don't have to rely on willpower to stop smoking. So another example of this is studies find that for helping people make healthier eating habits, changing your environment is a much better strategy. So this can be, for example, let's say I am studying or doing homework and I uh, want to snack and I feel hungry, right? If I have a piece of fruit on my desk versus some sort of like bag of chips or something unhealthy, if I have that fruit that's just right next to my desk, that is an environmental change. And that change is going to make it much easier for me to want to eat healthier because now all I got to do is just pick up the piece of fruit on my desk and eat it instead of eating a bag of chips. And so, therefore the trick is making the good habits as easy as possible to do, to where it takes as little effort as possible, as well as making the bad habits as hard as possible to do. So, with the example of eating healthier, what I would do in this case is not only would I have a piece of fruit or some healthy food on my desk that's right next to me that I can easily pick up, I would also want to have any sort of junk food, unhealthy food, as far as away as possible from me that I can. Or maybe even just not even purchase any unhealthy food and just have healthy food in my room or in my home. So, some more examples of changing your environment. For setting a habit to keep a schedule, one way you can do this more easily is to have your planning device with you at all times, right? So, for instance, having a piece of paper that you write your calendar or your weekly schedule on, maybe having a phone app where you are keeping your schedule, something like that. Always having that with you to where it's very easy to just pull it out and make your schedule is going to make it easier to form this habit. Another example is this is one that I do all the time. For making the habit of limiting your phone use, just turn it off or just put it in another room. This makes it to where I don't even have to think about whether or not I want to use my phone because I literally can't because it's turned off. Um, and for making it easier to make flashcards, this is another example. You can always have a stack of empty flashcards near your desk, right? This is to where, if I'm in the middle of studying some material for an exam and I want to make a flashcard, it is very easy for me to just pick up a flashcard and start making them. And so, in general, when you're wanting to change your environment, you want to think about the following sorts of questions. First is, how can I make the materials necessary for the habit easier or harder to access? Right? So, for instance, placing notes for a class nearby your desk to where it is very easy for you to pick them up and study them when you have to is an example of this. For a bad habit, right? Placing something like your phone far away from where you are studying is another example. Second question, how can I make frequent reminders to engage in habits accessible to me during the right place and time? So an example of this is write the habit or question on a piece of paper and post it somewhere easy for you to see on your desk, right? So for instance, if I want to remind myself constantly to make flashcards while I am studying, just putting a little note on my desk that just reminds me of this will help me form this habit. You can also do things like set reminders on your phone through different apps as well to remind yourself of this habit. That's another example of a environmental change. And the last big question that we want to think about is how can I change my physical location to make it easier to engage in good habits? Right? So this is one that I do all the time is studying in libraries or places where people are just dedicated for work will make the habit of engaging in work more easy. Right? This is because if I'm in a location where everybody else is studying, this is kind of a cue for me to be studying as well. It's going to make it easier to form that habit over time. Um, you know, that's why I recommend, when you're in university, there's going to be plenty of libraries, plenty of places that are just dedicated to studying. And those are going to be the better places usually to work. Instead of places like cafes or, well, sometimes cafes can be good places, but places like cafeterias or just loud, noisy areas are going to be less effective because one reason is it's going to be harder to focus. So now I'd like you all to pause, take a second to think about what we've just talked about, and think how could you change your environment to help form better habits? So take a second and think. All right, now we're going to move on to the rest of the tips for how to form better habits. So the second big tip for forming better habits is repetition. So forming a new habit requires repeating the behavior a lot of different times. Um, it enables us to execute the behavior quickly without considering all the different other behaviors that we could be doing. And so in terms of how long it'll take to form a habit, it'll differ and depend on the habit. Usually it'll take 2 to 6 months of consistent repetition according to research. So modifying your environment to make good habits as easy as possible will quicken the formation of that habit. But in general, though, you want to make as many possibilities to repeat the habit over time. So an example of considering this tip is first lessen your expectation for expecting success for forming a positive habit, right? So what I mean by this is that sometimes we expect that we're going to, within like 1 week, all of a sudden form this positive habit. And at least for me, speaking from personal experience, usually I have unrealistic expectations of thinking I can improve my behavior within a week. And usually it takes something like a month or much longer, just because habits just take a while to form. So changing your expectations is one way that we can improve our habits. Another example of this tip is to still try to do the habit even on bad days, right? So even when let's say for instance, going to the gym. for me is a habit that I have been forming over the past year. Even on days where I feel lazy or I feel very out of energy, I still try to go to the gym for at least a little bit of time and exercise because I know that even just doing a little bit of the habit will still form that habit over time. And so missing a few days of a good habit, it doesn't immediately restart the habit formation process. If I, for instance, just stopped going to the gym and stopped exercising for like a few days, that's not going to completely, start me back to square one with the habit. So don't get too frustrated when you miss your habit, but in general, you want to make as much repetition as possible to form the habit. So, the third tip for forming better habits is make your timing and environment consistent. What this means is, for instance, let's say I want to study more for a course. Um, I would want to form this habit of studying at a consistent time and environment, right? So maybe I want to study for the most challenging class I have um, in the library at 5 p.m. In this case, I'm going to try to want to always be able to do that with my schedule. And so, another example of this is to not just set the same habit at the same time, but to also set it in the same workspace, right? So, what I was saying before of like studying in the library is an example of making the environment as consistent as possible. And this is because when we are in the same timing and same environment, we're going to have the same sort of cues to perform that behavior within that specific context. And so, in general, try to think about the following factors for making them consistent for these habits. So, location, timing, the materials that you use to work with, environmental reminders, so things like having reminders on your phone or maybe reminders on little notes that you have on your desk, as well as the people that you work with, so maybe studying partners or friends or classmates. And another tip here too is to try to learn a few habits with highly consistent repetition, as well as many habits with inconsistency. So what this means is instead of trying to form like 5 or 6 new habits all at the same time, try to just do like one or two. If you're doing like five, six, seven, something like that, that's going to be very overwhelming and you're going to be very inconsistent, right? Maybe on some days you're able to do all 5 of those positive habits, but then other days you're going to be able to do maybe just 2 or 3. Instead, if you just stick to just one or two and just over time, just try to improve your habits over the course of weeks, months, and years, that's going to be much more effective to improve your performance in college. Okay, another tip is to reward good behaviors. Rewards are most effective when they are unexpected and they're immediately received after completing the behavior. Right, so an example is that after you complete a study session, maybe you would flip a coin to see if you get to reward yourself with something like, I don't know, watching some videos on YouTube or something like that. Um, and some other helpful tips to close with is engage in a new habit after doing an existing habit. So an example of this is, let's say I already have the habit of, an example could be I have the habit of studying for one class on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 p.m. And I want to make a new habit of studying for another class on Mondays and Wednesdays. What I could do is just say, I'm going to study for this other class on at 4 o'clock on Mondays and Wednesdays, right after I study at 3 o'clock. By making this habit be with or be next to the existing habit, it's going to be easier to form the new habit. Another tip is to try to swap the new habit with an existing habit if it is replaceable. So we'll talk about this in a future session, but research shows that it is more effective to quiz yourself with flashcards or with your notes rather than just to reread your notes. So if you want to engage in this better strategy to study, what you could just do is just swap your time rereading notes to instead use that time to quiz yourself with flashcards. So now I want you all to pause and consider this question. What are the most important habits that you can now start to form? All right. So to close with this lecture, I'm going to try to summarize everything that we've talked about. I know that we talked about a lot. I'll try to summarize what we've talked about and talk about how I would start to implement these ideas if I were to start from the beginning. So, what I would first want to do is start by clearly writing down the good habits that you want to adopt and the bad habits that you want to get rid of, considering what are the areas that you want to improve in the most. And I would also consider to just pick like probably just one habit that you want to improve at and one bad habit that you want to get rid of. Just because we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming ourselves with making a lot of behavioral change. Then what I would do is think about changing my environment. Because like I said, changing the environment is the most beneficial thing that we can be doing. So I would consider these following questions. First, what are the environmental forces that make it hard for me to engage in the good habit? Next, what would be the environmental forces that to make it easy to engage in the good and bad habits? And then, how can I change my environment to make good habits as easy as possible while making the bad habits as hard as possible to do? And I would also make sure that I'm thinking about these three questions over time, right? Over the course of weeks, not just at the very start of forming this habit. I'd also want to consider the following. So, what existing habits can I swap with this new habit? And how can I engage in a new habit after doing an existing habit? Just because these are going to make it easier to form the new habit over time. And then once I figure that out, I'm just going to want to repeatedly engage in positive habits with as much repetition as possible, while avoiding those negative habits, even on bad days, trying to be as consistent as possible, as well as consistent with the time and the environment. And then once I eventually have this habit formed to where it is automatic, which will take weeks or months, once I have this habit formed, then I will start to think about new habits to develop uh, in the next course of months. So yeah, that is everything on how to form better habits and break bad habits. If you guys have any questions or confusions, please ask. I am very happy to answer any questions that you all have. Have a great day.